Hello and welcome. So glad you've joined us. My name's Victoria Kettis and I'm a mom. I'm also a manager and facilitator with FamilySmart. So as parents, when our kids are having a hard time or we see something for the first time, we might question what's going on. We often wonder what are typical behaviors and how we know when something more might be going on for our child or youth. Our gut is telling us something's going on, but it's difficult to put our finger on it. So let's watch an animation to help us understand this and put some into context of the conversation we're going to have today.
Why can it feel so tricky to tell if our kids are on track, going through a phase, as opposed to struggling with something more or beyond the behaviors? It's so difficult to know if your child is presenting developmentally in range and when it's something more, because thoughts, emotions, and behaviors are always found on a continuum, and because we're always changing and developing. It's hard to tell because we're all parenting in the same pool. There's a deep end and there's a shallow end. For those of us who are swimming in the shallow end, we can stretch out our legs. We have a platform to stand on when we need to take a break to catch our breath. We feel more available for things like play, enjoyment, and adventure. It's not always awesome and easy, but for the most part, it's ticking along just fine. Others of us are parenting in the deep end, where we have to be on almost all the time. We're very busy putting out fires, and we feel high levels of parenting stress for long periods of time. You might wonder, why does it look so easy for everyone else? There are people at the edge of the pool for whom it can be tough to tell the shallow from the deep. There are spectators who observe who's in the pool. They might have kids playing independently in the shallow. They're lounging on beach chairs, sipping cold drinks, keeping one eye on their child, and maybe having an occasional request that they can adapt to, like, "Mom, can I have a sandwich?" "Well, not sure if I have sandwiches, but you can have a granola bar." "Aw, man, okay." And they continue to play. And then we have lifeguards. Those are monitor people in the pool. They monitor for signs that swimmers might need extra help. Parents in the shallow might be confused about why the parents in the deep end are having such a hard time having fun. Those parents seem to panic so often, find themselves drained and gasping for breath. They tread water more than they swim laps, and they usually have a child clinging to them for dear life. After a while, the parents in the deep end start to wonder if those in the shallow maybe have a point. Maybe we are making too much of this. Maybe I'm the problem. That can lead to shame, isolation, or silence. Those standing on the edge holding the life ring might have some training about how to throw the ring, but many of them aren't really sure who to throw the ring toward or when. Or if you've tread water in the deep long enough, the ring might actually be floating near you, but you A, aren't sure if it's the right ring for you, B, you're tired and you are worn, too worn to reach for it, or C, I don't want others in the pool seeing me need this ring just to stay afloat. Deep end parents who are isolated, overwhelmed, and good at pretending that it's great in the deep end are the parents who drown more quickly and the kids who start thinking that the "this is beyond normal" is about who they are, not the water that they're swimming in. Some parents are what I call synchronized swimmers. They've got that forced smile on their face. They're performing pretty well, but underneath the water, their heart is racing, their limbs are flailing, and they're trying to keep their breath. It makes it hard, actually, for lifeguards to see that you're struggling in the deep, or that you might need a real break. This can also make it more difficult to fully be noticed or understood by the lifeguards, by the swimmers in the shallow, or the spectators on the sidelines. What also makes it confusing is that kids who swim mostly in the deep occasionally spend time in the shallow. The key is to consider where they spend most of their time and their energy. So you might hear others say things like, "They seem fine when they're at school," or "When we camped together this summer with you guys, the kids seemed to get along just fine." That might just be because they only see your kid when they visit the shallow end. It also might make it more confusing for you. When you see your kid able to control their emotions or complete tasks without a whole lot of coaching, you might be baffled when the very next day they can't just seem to do those things anymore. It's a pretty defeating feeling to watch that as a parent, thinking you haven't made any gains. Asking for a life ring can require vulnerability, bravery, stamina, and an ability to weed through the available supports for the ones that fit your needs best. No small task when you're almost out of air and taking on water. I learned to swim better when others recognized I was swimming in the deep water, when the water was framed for me in context to what I was struggling with and why, and when I was told it's okay to take care of yourself. We know that naming the depth of the pool early is important for learning to swim in rough waters and strong currents that are ever-changing. It's important for your child who is struggling in those same waters and is half the size and doesn't have half the equipment to deal with the storms. When you feel like you're just hanging on, it's probably something more. And that means it's not just okay to reach for a life ring, it is encouraged. You are a good parent who is dealing with treacherous and relentless swimming conditions. There are other parents in the deep who do get it, and they are a resource. There are professionals who do understand that you are the expert on your child, and that while there are no simple fixes, you are not alone. There are a lot of situations that will land a person in the deep end of the pool. They might be your child's mental health, and it might be your own, and it's okay to be curious about both. Neither are your fault, and both are important for your wellness and your functioning as a family. It might be because of circumstances or experiences in your life that were out of your control. There are safe places to talk about the deep end, to look at it from many angles and offer it compassion and attention. Sometimes we need to problem solve. Sometimes we need to adjust our expectations and adapt our approach to parenting. And sometimes we need to grieve or heal so that we can be present and connected. The goal is always to belong to one another better and grow to our capacity, no matter where you find yourself in the pool.
So I'm joined today by Karen Peters. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Yes, I'm Karen. I am also a mom of two, and my previous career was in the Ministry for Children and Family Development for about 20 years, and then I have since shifted to full-time private practice. I partner up with FamilySmart on a number of projects, so I'm glad to be part of this one as well.
Thank you, Karen, and welcome. As parents, we often compare our children to others because we want to make sense of what we're seeing with our own as a mom or a dad. So can you help us break down some of the differences of things we may see when it comes to developmentally, what is in range, and of course, what is more? So let's maybe start with 4 to 5 year olds.
Yeah. So for 4 to 5 year olds, we're talking about that those early school years, right? So that introduction to a bigger world. So maybe your kids have been in daycare prior, so they have a little bit of that. But this opens up all new sorts of new opportunities for social engagement and different kinds of activities and just opportunities to interact with a broader world. So in that sense, 4 to 5 year olds are, the curve of learning is really steep. They're taking a whole lot in really quickly, and they're they have to adapt pretty fast. Kids at that age are starting to learn things like self-control. So it's not just managing big feelings, although that is a really big part of it, but it's also to know kind of sense of boundaries of this is the time for something, this is not the time for something. This is the place for something, this is not the place for something. And meltdowns still happen because that prefrontal cortex is not developed. Actually, until we're in our 20s, it's not fully developed. So we have to be very patient with our kids around this. But you'd start to see progress in the sense of I can be a bit more reasonable. I can hear another person's perspective. I can sit still a little bit longer than I used to be able to. And so you might see things like occasional lying, cheating, trying to test kind of like what's okay, what's not okay. But they respond to what they learn from those experiences. So they're collecting information by testing those waters, and they use that information to know next time what the consequences might be. So you can see some kind of growth in that area of development. When kids are 4 and 5, though, and they live in the deep end, what you're seeing is more about like the big feelings override reason pretty much all the time. So rarely can we have this reasonable dialogue with a child who lives in the deep at that age because they're so flooded so much of the time, and it's a quick fuse. So there's no long ramp up. There's we've hit the ceiling. That happened quickly. And there's this impulse because kids who are in the deep at that age struggle to be calm enough to use words, and their language is not yet really well developed. And so for one, they have to be able to learn how to notice what's in their body and then communicate it. That's not an easy thing for a 4 or 5 year old to do, which is why we still see meltdowns. But for kids in the deep, it becomes aggressive and violent, or maybe destructive to property, on a regular basis, not once in a while. And the intensity of it, or the length and duration of it, is higher. So we're talking like, does it happen 4, 5 or more times a day that they're significant? And do the meltdowns happen and they last for longer than 25 minutes, right? That is a definite signal. There's something there that is not functioning for them at this stage. And we'd want to get some support around that because that's an exhausting experience. Yeah. So for 4 to 5 year olds, I think that's the difference. What you feel about what kind of grows naturally over the course of those 2 years, as opposed to, it seems like my kid's getting stuck somewhere here. The learning's not happening.
Great. Thanks for that differentiation. What about 6 to 8 year olds?
For 6 to 8, this is such a fun age because like language skills are broadening. They're reading more. They're curious about the world. There's the play kind of shifts from this parallel play where kids play beside each other doing different things, but they're next to each other. This is much more interactive where there's a whole lot more sharing and dialogue, negotiation about things. They have to manage these social dynamics quite differently. They're sitting longer in their desks and they're doing, more hands-on activity, but it's more structured, and there's also more opportunity for kind of free time that isn't highly monitored. So when you're 6 to 8, you have hallway interactions with kids that maybe don't have a teacher hovering over you. So you have to know how to navigate some of those things too. And so kids at this age also are learning things like to be able to know consequences of what's coming and looking down the road of how to plan for things. You have to be able to order and sequence things, right? So this is a skill where we do things like sorting activities or figuring out like, well, if that happens, then what's going to happen next in the story? And if that happens in the story, how did Sally feel when that happened in the story? And so it's inferring things, and it's guessing as to what people's experiences might be that might not be your own. So things like empathy building, right? I can tell how you feel because of the look on your face or what you said to me or how your body looks. And then I know how to respond because you look like you need something from me. When kids are 6 to 8, but live in the deep end, what it more looks like is potentially being rigid. So a lot of black and white thinking. There's a right and a wrong. Lots of fairness talk. That isn't fair. I need it to be this way to feel okay. There could be some struggles around social stuff with peers. So the hallway talks don't go so well. You're in my space and I don't know how to ask for space. So I use my body to assert myself, I'll take things instead of ask for them. I'll bump up against you and not say sorry. It's some of those smaller things of recognizing my space versus your space. And when that's missing, it's hard to be friends, right? So then we see things like kids getting left out at lunchtime. We don't want to play with so-and-so because they don't know how to play with us. Or rules get broken. And so it's not predictable. So we don't know how to play with that person. And so we start to see some of these things either erode or not progress. It doesn't grow into kind of solid social groups or predictability in terms of how kids interact. And they can struggle just internally with their own insight. I can't tell what I'm feeling right now. I can't name it. I can't articulate it. I don't know what this feeling is. I don't know where it is in my body. I don't know who I am. It's this identity piece of like, I'm too reliant on who you are to tell me who I am, that I don't have a say in anything. I'll default, I'll people please. So some of those things are struggles that when they're chronic, and it's not just, I'm getting through it and I'm learning by testing these things out. It's like for 2 years, I've been doing that this way. Again, that's where the flag happens. Yeah.
So as a mom, I think about all of those things, not necessarily things we have control over as parents, and how hard that is when things are hard. We don't have any control over it. And we know it's not, we want to focus on the things we do have control over because then things just go way better. How do we cope? What are the things that we can do to cope with that? And what things do we have some control over in order to manage through this hard time?
So I want to urge this part. I want this to be a really strong storyline in our talk today because of how important I think and how critical it is. But I also understand how hard it is to receive. So self-care gets thrown around a lot. Lots of people will tell us, you need a break. Take time for yourself and you need self-care. And I think that wears on us because when you're in the deep, it's hard to hear that when you're treading water. Like, oh, that's easy for you to say. Well, how am I going to take a break? But at the same time, I do know that we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. When there are opportunities to take tiny breaks, we don't take them because we feel guilty for not somehow always being present for a child. So I just want to say, please give yourself permission because that is what it requires. It requires you to say, I will let myself take a break if I actually need a break. And for me, that mattered. I was allowing myself to do that more when I recognized it wasn't just about me feeling better, that I was way more capable of being present and staying true to what I wanted to do in parenting when I did that. So my child benefited, my partner benefited. We all benefited slightly from this shift in my ability to say, it's okay that I'm not on all the time, that I'm willing to absorb some of the risk that I see to just sit for 5 minutes and breathe. So does it stop the chaos around you? No. But will you let yourself acknowledge that, and I really believe this is true for parents in the deep, that you can be 110% for your kids. And you can be there 110% 24/7. You can be constantly available, and it will still not be enough. So when you live in the deep, it isn't just enough to say, if I just try harder and be more available. You can do all the things, and you will still feel like it's tough to be in the deep. And so taking the break is not about letting go of the possibility of we'll make it. It just, you need to take the break. It's going to be hard no matter what. And so the other piece of self-care is also the other care, that you don't rule out connecting with other people. And so that interactive care offers us something we can't give for ourselves. We can't tell ourselves we're not alone if we insulate and isolate ourselves. We need to be able to be in connection with other people to recognize that truly we are not alone. And I think that goes a whole long way. I also think we have to be very realistic. Don't set yourself up for something that's not possible. So when you go into self-care planning, there's zero shame in doing this alongside somebody. So reach out to a close friend who gets it, another parent who's in the deep, ask what works for them, ask to trade off, partner up in the planning, and be realistic and ask yourself, what actually recharges me? Because what recharges me and my neighbor are completely different things, right? So me just adopting their self-care plan is not going to cut it. I have to recognize, where do I feel calmer? What am I doing? Where am I in space, in location? Who am I with? How long does it need to last for me to feel like my nervous system can come back to ground zero again? Mm-hmm. And when we know those things about ourselves, then we can actually do something with it. In the moment of chaos is not the time to be trying to figure out what you need, So even writing it down, I would always encourage people in the calm, take 5 minutes just to brainstorm, close your eyes, brainstorm, what does it look like for me to recharge? What are the conditions I need that allow me to calm myself down? And put them on paper so that you can come back to those as reference points. And, if you want to know more about how your kid is doing, that's where the assessment pieces come in, right? So there's the self-care and how I'm doing piece. But if you feel like you have no idea what's happening for your child, you just know how big of a struggle that is, that's where you reach out to people like your doctor, a therapist, a psychologist, psychiatrist, or a mentor, and you ask them, where do I get help with this piece? How do I better understand the internal world of my child so that I can meet them and connect with them better? And really, at the end of the day, your ultimate goal is for every person to reach their own capacity and for each person to feel interconnected and in a relationship in healthy ways, right? So whatever that looks like for you or your child might not be the same as somebody else.
Karen, you've given us so much to think about. And this analogy of being in the pool really helps give a visual to what it's like for many families. As I hear you talk about who we can reach out to and finding those other people like us that are living this too, and finding peer support. So I'm so grateful for our parents and residents that can be there for other families. Any final thoughts? You've answered all my questions so eloquently. Is there anything else that you would like to share before we wrap up?
No, just an acknowledgement that we are all in this together. So I so appreciate how parents show up every day, even though they know how deep the water is.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us in the know this month. FamilySmart has received funding for this project from the Provincial Health Services Authority and the Ministry of Children and Family Development in partnership with Here to Help. We really love receiving feedback from you, so please take time to answer our feedback survey so that we can continue to do this work in ways that are meaningful to you. And thank you. And I wish you all ease as you find your place in the pool, wherever it may be, and that you reach out and grab that ring when it comes to you when you need it. And take care, everyone.